I think if you look at the history of the European Union, the main achievement has been this creation of what people call the single market. By the way, a creation of Margaret Thatcher, Nigel Farage's great heroine. It created this huge marketplace of 500 million people.
So created by Maggie, and while he's trying to tarnish Farage everywhere he can, he states that Maggie was Farage's heroine. So on the other hand, he's pro-Europe and single marketplace, so then he must applaud Maggie and Farage's support of our policies, right? Which is it, Clegg? However, Clegg chooses to ignore the greater detail and history of Thatcher, read EU and single market. But here is the big lying omission.
Their own democracies and their own rights of self-government. General elections have been rendered, frankly, fairly impotent affairs because we've given away the control of most of our country. I was astonished last week in the first of these debates when Nick Clegg claimed that only 7% of our laws are made in Brussels. He said it was there in the House of Commons library note and therefore was unequivocal. Well, I've got the note with me, Nick, and on page 1 it says the British government estimates that around 50% of UK legislation comes from Brussels. There are other estimates. Coming direct from the European Commission that over 70% of our laws are made in Brussels, and in Germany they reckon 84% of their national laws are made somewhere else. It's time we said, let's run our own democracies in France, Britain and Germany, work and trade together in a European club, but not in a political union. Bring back democracy.
When you say 70% or whatever, you're talking about regulations or laws? You're talking about major things or the detail?
What's interesting?
Maybe I can help.
Yeah. What is interesting is the House of Commons library
very clear.
Doesn't include EU regulations. That's the point.
Okay. It actually says three things, rather. Firstly, 7%, no, not 75%, which was the figure cooked up fictitiously by Nigel Farage last week. 7% of primary legislation is derived from the European Union. 14% are what they call statutory instruments. Those are also laws, but they're done through secondary legislation. And then they say it's difficult to estimate exactly how many non-legislative regulations are produced. But then no one says that this fictional figure of 75% has any bearing in reality at all. So all I would say is let's have this debate not based on scaremongering, not on some sort of dangerous fantasy or con, but actually on some of the realities that we have to face as a modern country.
So are there no unelected bureaucrats?
Do you know what primary legislation is? Primary law are simply the treaties themselves, the actual treaties between countries. So as you can see here, primary sources of EU law is all the treaties between member states and the EU itself. Nothing to do with the laws for you and I. The secondary sources of EU law are the real laws that impact you and I on the street: crime, movement, immigration, business, everything to do with you and I. The secondary sources which impact you and I find the source of their power to be enabled to be enacted from the primary sources. So that 7% is just between the member states and the EU. When they internationally agree these treaties, they then say, well, okay, now you can start applying laws to your people. The new legislative framework, you'll notice here, legislative acts and non-legislative acts, or as they call them, executive acts. What are executive acts? Well, that's something you'll find out very soon. So here you are, law made by the European institutions in the exercise of the powers conferred on them by the primary law. That's secondary sources of law. So you see, when Mr. Clegg states only 7% are primary legislation, he's right. But that primary legislation are the treaties themselves. These are the laws which the EU signs with all member states, and they are essentially the enabling acts, which then provide the basis for the real or substantive laws to be implemented on the people within the states. Mr. Clegg has purposefully misled you. Of course, there would only be 7% of primary legislation. However, Clegg tries to make the audience believe that such laws are the ones you and I consider laws which directly affect us. The man is a barefaced liar. Would you like to see the effect the EU has had on the number of laws we have introduced since the European Economic Communities Act came into being? Well, here is pre-EEC. And here's the gradual introduction of the UK within the EEC. And here's the last 25 or so years. Get the picture? I hope so.
It actually says three things, rather. Firstly, 7%, no, not 75%, which was the figure cooked up fictitiously by Nigel Farage. 7% of primary legislation is derived from the European Union. 14% are what they call statutory instruments. Those are also laws, but they're done through secondary legislation. And then they say it's difficult to estimate exactly how many non-legislative regulations are produced.
Watch Clegg as he tries to brush off the secondary legislation, which are the substantive laws. He dismisses them as, oh, they're just something else, as he fiddles with his hands. But that secondary legislation is statutory instruments, as shown in the previous diagrams.
14% are what they call statutory instruments. Those are also laws, but they're done through secondary legislation.
But then we come to non-legislative acts, and this is a killer.
And then they say it's difficult to estimate exactly how many non-legislative regulations are produced. But
do you know what non-legislative means? Barack Obama does. They're executive orders, subject to no democratic vote in Parliament, and yet Clegg dismisses them, but states, very quickly as if it doesn't matter, that nobody knows how many executive orders are made. Who makes them? Did you vote for them? Nope.